We are approaching a strange Passover. Do I mean a second Passover qualified and conditioned by being in the midst of a perpetuated pandemic? This time, no. This time, we have the delight to revel in the strangeness of something that has nothing to do with COVID. So let's take that opportunity with both hands and do just that. So, what renders this year's Pesach an odd one? Its first night begins right after Shabbat. Emails have been written and delivered which have described all the ways in which our normal Pesach rhythms are rearranged due to Erev Pesach landing on Motzei Shabbos. The firstborn fast is on Thursday, Chametz is kind of eliminated on Friday, but really you can eat it all the way through Shabbos, not that we recommend it, for kitchen-based reasons. The first night Seder starts as late as the second night's normally does, because we have to wait for Shabbat to officially end. But again, all of those details are in the e-news. What I want to talk about in this year's Shabbat haGadol sermon is the last special element we encounter when Pesach begins as Shabbos ends, the elongated series of blessings we say when we kick off the Seder with Kadesh, known affectionately in the Talmud as YaKNeHaZ. YaKNeHaZ? What in the world is that? I'll tell you. It's an acronymic mnemonic to help us remember what order the blessings go in. As the first Kiddush of the Seder also serves as the Havdalah to end Shabbat, so YaKNeHaZ stands for Yayin, Ya, Kiddush, K, Ner, N, Havdalah, Ha, Zman, Shechianu, Z. YaKNeHaZ! As a quick aside, have you ever been baffled by the prevalence of wood block cuts of hare hunts in many historical Haggadot? Well, wonder no further. The custom of including such artwork served as a kind of artistic mnemonic for the YaKNeHaZ ordering of blessings. This artistic association began in medieval Germany as the phrase, hunt the hares, jagen des Haz. Sounds a heck of a lot like YaKNeHaZ. This is a little fun thing I wanted to throw in. However, as with all things Talmudic, really all things Jewish, nothing is ever so simple. It took a bit of a process for the rabbis to finally settle on that being the proper ordering of the blessings. What seems at first glance to be a merely technical problem in an immensely technical subfield of Jewish law, Hilchos Brachos. When we first look at the question and what motivates the different responses, we come to see that the rabbis were not just arguing about liturgical ordering, but were in truth trying to figure out how to set priorities and how to articulate their values. So let's look at the sugya together. If you want to learn along at home, it's found in Maseches Pesachim 102a through 103a. The rabbis begin by paying attention to a different moment of transition, that between the weekday and Shabbat. We are told a story of rabbis gathering for a Friday afternoon meal, and they get so into it that Shabbat happens upon them before they have a chance to finish. However, they are obligated to sanctify the day when Shabbos starts, so they need to officially conclude their profane prandial and then make Kiddush. When one dines in the company of one's peers, it is fitting to say Birkat Hamazon over a glass of wine, like we do at Shalosh Shittas. But it would be inappropriate and insufficiently dignified to reuse the wine from a weekday meal for the blessing that sanctifies Shabbat. As Rav Nachman insists, one does not perform mitzvot in batches. So, as the Talmud reports, 2 glasses of wine are brought out, one for the grace after meals, and the second to make kiddush. What is striking about this is that, in a way, Havdalah is a practice we commonly associate with the end of Shabbat as we mournfully re-enter the week. However, here, Havdalah, conceived more broadly as the practice of making a difference, is something that is common to all moments of transition. We take out a second glass of wine to signify to God that we are aware that a special day has come, that we have a chance to say a new blessing, to enter a new dimension of existence, the unique holiness of the Sabbath. And as we know from Rashi's interpretation of God's deeming us an Am Kadosh, right, Kadoshim Tihiyu, to regard something as holy, as kadosh, is to set it aside. That's like to dedicate in modern Hebrew, and even in halachic Hebrew, is lahakdish, to set it aside, to render it special. We recognize Shabbat's holiness by rendering it distinct. We manifest its holiness by treating it as special. Great! So now after learning that shtickle Gemara, we have come to realize that when we transition from one dimension of existence to another, we should mark them with separate rituals, separate blessings, separate glasses of wine. And that is why Kadesh in a Saturday night Seder is done over 2 glasses of wine. Wait a second. No, it's not. Directly contravening Rav Nachman's principle, we say the whole batch in one continuous stream of blessings. Yain, Kiddush, Ner, haGadol, Zman, YaKNeHaZ. How can, it's the YaKNeHaZ hands, right? How can we square this with what we just learned? Here's the Kashya. While it is not mentioned explicitly in the Gemara, I think we're dealing with a different situation when Shabbat turns into Passover than when Friday becomes Shabbat. In the latter case, we are ascending in holiness, as the profane weekday is imbued with the sanctity of Shabbat. But Erev Pesach this year, we are descending in holiness, Kivyachol, as the highest level of Shabbos shifts down a gear into the still special, but not quite as much special, Passover Eve. And as we learn in the Gemara, Ma'alin b'kodesh velo moridin, we go up in holiness, we don't go down. So, as we enter a higher madrega when Shabbos begins, it demands we recognize it with a second special glass of wine. But when Shabbos ends and Pesach begins, the holiness of Shabbat carries us forward, such that the expansive sanctity of the wine glass used for Havdalah can also accommodate the Kiddush for Yontif. However, as noted, the Talmud does not bring in this reasoning, even though it seems to work. Why is that? We're reading for the gaps here. Instead, it focuses its attention on the pantry. The question it raises, for the explanation for pouring all of these blessings into 1 cup of wine, is that perhaps one has a shortage. And since halacha understands human limits, if one does not have enough funds to purchase sufficient quantities of wine, one is allowed to say the blessings all over a single cup. But that can't be the case here. As the Gemara notes, on the first night of the festival, one has enough wine. But why do we assume that? Well, Rashi explains, even the poor of Israel will not have less than 4 cups of wine on Pesach. This is a testimony to the essential importance of the tzedakah of ma'ot chitim, of the money we set aside to make sure that every single Jew has the means to partake of a Passover feast. Rashi takes it as a matter of faith that it would simply be impossible for someone not to have enough delicacies to have a properly satisfying and satiating Seder. Kain Yehi Ratzon. If you haven't had a chance yet, please remember, give ma'ot chitim. So, if we presume that everyone has enough wine to cover an extra glass on Pesach, why is it that we persist in having YaKNeHaZ? We don't have to, so it seems like a choice. And as the Gemara details, rabbi after rabbi have their own theory as to the correct ordering of the blessings. It's Rava whose solution we follow, but his bar plukta Abaye argues for Yakzana, Yain Kiddush Zman, Ner Havdalah. And on the last days of Pesach, when Shechianu is not said, there are even more proposals. Rav says Yakneh, Shmuel says Yinhak, Rabba says Yanek, Levi says Kaniya, etc., etc., etc. As gestured to above, I see these seemingly minute disagreements as signifying something beyond the technical details. The rabbis are arguing over what a proper ordering should be in order to carry out the intention we discussed at the top of the discourse, how to properly acknowledge the sanctity of the moment. Rabbi Chanina is troubled by the ambiguity that bedevils this question and dispatches a shaila, a halachic question, to the patriarch, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who sends back an authoritative report that the proper order is Ner, Havdalah, Yain, Kiddush, and Zman when appropriate, we can assume. YaKNeHaZ. Nehayak. And this ordering is given a mushal, a parable, to help explain it. L'maha devar domet, to what can we compare this? There is a mortal king exiting a city as the governor is entering it. What does etiquette demand we do first? We first escort out the king, and only then do we welcome the governor. So, as the Shabbat queen is leaving, we first give her her due, making the Havdalah blessings, and only then do we say Kiddush as we welcome in Yontif. And that makes perfect sense. The end. But wait! That is not the conclusion we end up following. I cannot stress this enough. The order of blessings we follow is YaKNeHaZ, Yain, Kiddush, Ner, Havdalah, Zman. The Yontif blessings go before the Havdalah blessings. It's the opposite of what we just saw in Rabbi Chanina's parable. How can we contravene the tradition authorized by the sainted editor of the Mishnah, especially since that parable makes it make such elegant sense? And here we come to the conclusion of this twisty-turny sermon-y. We follow Rava in first welcoming in Yontif, and only after escorting out Shabbat. Why? Well, let's return to the mushal. At first we thought that we first give regard and due deference to Shabbos, to give its exit priority. But if we think of the impact in addition to our intention, then we realize that we would, in truth, be disrespecting Shabbos to usher her out first. After all, are we in such a hurry that we want her to leave? By tarrying a bit in escorting her out, we indicate that we cannot bear her departure and wish she could stay. Perhaps the first evidence of a Jewish farewell, in which we say goodbye, but we never leave. And as Rashi explains in his commentary, if we were to say Havdalah first, it could seem as if Shabbos were a burden on us, rather than the sweetness and joy we know it to be. So what are we left with? An especially propitious moment, a liminal time in which we are imbued with not one, but two kinds of sanctity, that of Shabbos as it lingers, and that is Yontif as it enters. We say Kiddush to welcome in Pesach, and that holiness mixes and mingles with the holy sparks of the sanctity of Shabbat. We began this discourse assuming that the proper way to mark a transition was through separation. But the ritual of YaKNeHaZ gives us a new model, one of expansiveness, one of inclusion, one of invitation, one of sharing. We intentionally make this series of blessings on one cup, as the sweetness of two kinds of sanctity mix in the cup and swirls between us. Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach.